So this video will be on canceling repeated values with algebra and subtraction. So the first thing we need to do is set up two algebra equations, and they will look something like this. They will say x equals. And these are actually the beginning of algebra equations that we're going to fill out. And so that's all we're going to do for that first step. The next thing we need to do is we need to consider our value. And so I need to actually give you a value. So let's consider the value 4.7 repeating. And so if we're considering this value, it tells me to multiply by 1, 10, 100, or 1000 to get the repeated value next to the decimal point. And so if we look here, my repeated value is 7. Is that next to the decimal point? Yes, it is next to the decimal point. So we actually don't need to do anything to this. We can just multiply this by 1, we say. And so I'm going to say this is going to be 4.7. And we're going to say this is going to be 1x equals 4.7 repeating. Okay, so we've done this. And then it says multiply each equation by 10, 100, or 1000 above to align repeated values. And so in this case, we're just going to multiply by 10. And so if I do that, I'm going to multiply by 10. And when I multiply 4.7 times 10, I end up getting 47.7 repeating. Okay, so we've multiplied by that. And then finally it says subtract the algebra side of the equation. So if I do 10x minus 1x, so if I do a subtraction here, 10x minus 1x, that's going to give me 9x equals, and we've subtracted the algebra side of the equation. Now I want to subtract the decimal side of the equation, and so that's going to be 47.7 repeated minus 4.7 repeating. And so I'm going to do 0.7 repeating minus 0.7 repeating, that's going to be 0. And then I'm going to do 47 minus 4. Well, 47 minus 4 is going to give me 43. And so I end up with 9x equals 43. And so that is the entire process here. You could say 9x, you could get rid of that 0.0, so you could say 9x equals 43 as well. Either one of these is fine for right now. You couldn't include the 0.0, it doesn't matter, but both of these would be correct answers for this problem. And so notice how what we did here. What we did was we got rid of this repeating decimal value, and that's pretty cool. And this strategy will always allow us to get rid of our repeating decimal values, which can be useful in math because sometimes these are a little difficult to work with and get exact values with. And you'll kind of see why this is really useful later, and it'll be kind of cool, I'm hoping, for you. But for now, just know this is an important skill for us to have, to take a value like this and be able to follow these steps so we end up with some equation that looks something like this, where we have a value on the right-hand side that does not have a repeating decimal place. Okay, we're going to look at two more examples now just to give like the different flavors this kind of algebra and subtraction cancellation can have. So let me delete this off the screen. And let's try again with another repeating decimal value, 2.08 repeated. All right. So in this case, we're going to set up the algebra equation just like always. We're going to have our 2. And I don't want to delete that, so let me put that back. So we are going to set up our algebra equations, and it's always going to just be x equals for this. So we need to actually fill in these algebra equations, and we have it set up now. So we need to multiply by 1, 10, 100, or 1000 to get the repeated value next to the decimal point. So notice how my repeated value in this case is just 8. It doesn't include the 0. And so if I want to get the repeated value next to the decimal point, I have to multiply this by moving it one place value. And that's also known as multiplying by 10, right? Because I'm moving it one place value. And so I'm going to say that we're going to multiply this by 10, and I'm going to end up with 20.8 repeated. All right. Now, whichever number I multiplied by, in this case it was 10, I'm going to put over here on the left-hand side of my equation. So this ends up being 10 times x is 20.8 repeated. Okay, so the next step is we need to multiply the equation by 10, 100, or 1000 above to align the repeated values. And so in this case, if you look, we can just multiply by 10 again because it's just one single repeated value. So we can multiply by 10. And so if I multiply 10 by 10, that's going to be 100. And if I multiply 20.8 repeated by 10, well, I'm going to move the place value once. And so I'm going to have 208, and then comes the decimal point. And then I can do 8 repeated like this. And so now I have multiplied the top by 10. And you might be asking, why am I multiplying by 10 and not 100 or 1000? Well, basically, if you just have one value repeated, you're going to multiply by 10. If you had two values repeated, which we'll see in the next one, we'll multiply by 100. Okay, but the next step is to subtract the algebra side of the equation. So the side with the x's is the algebra side. So we're going to subtract this side. And so I have 100x minus 10x. Well, 100 minus 10 is 90x equals, and then I'm finished that. Now I'm going to subtract the decimal side of the equation. So I have 208.8 repeating minus 20.8 repeating. And so when I subtract this, I'm going to have my 0.8s repeating. Those are going to cancel out, and I'll get 0.0. And then I have 208 minus 20. Well, I could do this by hand, or I could use my calculator. So when I do this, I should end up with 188. And you can do this by canceling things out, or you can just type in your calculator if you like, 208 minus 20, and it should give you 188. So now that we have done that, we are finished this problem. The only optional last step that you can do from here, if you want to be like a little bit fancy, you can simplify 188.0, and you can actually just write 188. That's the same value because we know if it's 0.0, it's written like this. So both of these options are good. This top one or this bottom one. All right, now let's look at one more example. So I'm going to get rid of this example. I'm going to delete this. And our final example is going to be 9.63 with both the 6th and the 3 repeating. So let's look at how we solve this problem. We start off the same as we always do. We set up our algebra equations. So we're going to have two x equals equations. Step 1 is complete. Now we need to multiply by 110 or 1000 to get the repeated value, or in this case, values next to the decimal point. Well, if I look at this 9.63, the repeated values are already right next to the decimal point, so I can leave those as they are. And so I'm really multiplying by 1 in this case because I'm not moving anything. And so we're going to say 1x equals 9.63. All right, now here's actually, I want to give myself a little bit more space. You'll see why in a minute. So I'm going to put 9.63 with a little gap here, and I'll explain why in a minute. All right, so we have done this step here. Now the next step, it says multiply the equation by 10, 100, 1000, etc. above to align the repeated values. So this is important. If I multiplied this by 10, what I would end up is 96.3636 and repeating like that. The issue is these don't actually cancel out. And so I don't want to multiply by 10 in this case because that's not going to work out well for me. What I would do better to do is if I need to align these up, I'm going to say 963.63. And you see how that's nice and aligned? Well, how did I do that? I had to multiply in this case by 100. And a good tip is if you have two values that are repeating, you're going to multiply by 100. If I had like 3 values, so if I had like 2.175 and 175 was repeating, then I would multiply by 1000. And that's kind of how that works. So the number of zeros you multiply by is based on this. So I'm going to do 1 times 100 is 100. And now I can do my subtraction. So I'm going to do 100x minus 1x. That's going to give me 99x equals, and then I have to do this subtraction. So my repeated values cancel exactly as I want them to. 0.63 minus 0.63 is going to give me 0.0. And now I have to do 963 minus 9. I'm going to take advantage of my calculator here. 963 minus 9, that's going to give me 954. And so this is the final answer for this one. You could, of course, simplify slightly if you like to, and write 99x equals 954. So both of these versions of the solution are acceptable. Either one you can put, and that's totally fine. Okay, that is it for this video, and so that's how we cancel repeated values with algebra and subtraction.